The first week after Isabella's birth passed like a beautiful dream that Elena knew would end too soon. James had arranged for the best postpartum care, including a night nurse so Elena could rest, but he spent every possible moment in the hospital room with Elena and their daughter. "She has your stubborn streak," James observed one morning as Isabella fussed during a diaper change. "She knows exactly what she wants and isn't shy about demanding it." Elena smiled tiredly. "She gets that from both sides. You're pretty stubborn yourself, Mr. Morrison." The easy banter between them felt natural, like they'd been partners in parenting for years instead of days. But underneath the comfortable moments lay an unspoken tension. Neither had mentioned their original agreement since Isabella's birth, but they both knew the conversation couldn't be avoided much longer. Dr. Chen cleared Elena for discharge on Friday morning. As Elena packed her few belongings, the reality of leaving the hospital hit her hard. Once they left this room, real life would intrude on the bubble they'd created around their little family. "Ready?" James asked softly, holding Isabella's car seat. Elena nodded, though she felt anything but ready. "Where should I go?" The question hung between them. Elena's apartment lease had expired while she was staying at James's penthouse. Technically, their arrangement was complete. James had his heir and Elena had her money. There was no legal reason for them to remain connected. "Come home with us," James said quietly. "Please." Elena's heart leaped, but she forced herself to think practically. "For how long?" "As long as you want to stay." The drive to James's penthouse was quiet except for Isabella's soft breathing from her car seat. Elena stared out the window at the city she'd lived in her whole life, wondering if she was making a terrible mistake by not walking away cleanly. Once they were settled back in the penthouse, the domestic reality of caring for a newborn took over. Isabella needed to eat every 2 hours, day and night. Diaper changes seemed constant. Elena was still recovering from childbirth and exhausted in ways she'd never experienced. James threw himself into fatherhood with the same intensity he brought to business. He learned to change diapers with military precision, mastered the art of baby burping, and could prepare a bottle faster than Elena, despite her weeks of practice with the hospital staff. "You're a natural at this," Elena told him one night as he walked Isabella around the living room, soothing her back to sleep after a feeding. "I had good motivation to learn," James replied, his voice soft with contentment. During Isabella's nap times, James and Elena found themselves talking about everything, except the one topic that mattered most: what happened next. They discussed Isabella's feeding schedule, her pediatrician appointments, the nursery James was having designed. But they didn't talk about Elena's future or whether she planned to stay. The turning point came 2 weeks after Isabella's birth. Elena woke in the middle of the night to the sound of Isabella crying. But when she went to the nursery, she found James already there, walking the floor with their daughter. "Shh, little one," James murmured. "Daddy's here. Everything's okay." Elena stood in the doorway watching James comfort their daughter with gentle words and infinite patience. In that moment, she realized that staying wasn't just about her feelings for James or her love for Isabella. It was about recognizing that they had become a real family, not just a business arrangement that had gotten complicated. "She's lucky to have you," Elena said softly. James turned, surprised to see her there. "I thought you were sleeping." "I heard her cry and came to help, but you have everything under control." Isabella had quieted in her father's arms, her tiny fist curled around his finger. The sight made Elena's chest tight with emotion. "Elena," James said carefully, "I need to tell you something." Elena's heart started pounding. "What?" "I don't want you to leave." The words hung between them in the soft glow of the nursery nightlight. Elena felt tears prick her eyes. "The arrangement?" "Forget the arrangement," James interrupted gently. "I'm not talking about contracts or obligations. I'm talking about what I want. What I hope you want too." Elena stepped closer, her voice barely a whisper. "What do you want, James?" "I want to marry you," James said simply. "I want to raise Isabella together. I want to build a real family with you, not because of some legal requirement, but because I love you." Elena felt her knees go weak. "You love me?" "I've loved you for months," James said, still holding Isabella but moving closer to Elena. "I think I started falling for you that first day in the coffee shop when you told me about your mother. You have this incredible strength and compassion that amazes me every day. Elena reached out to touch Isabella's tiny hand, then looked up at James. I love you too. I've been terrified to admit it because I thought you'd think I was trying to change our agreement for my own benefit. Our agreement was the worst idea I ever had, James said with a soft laugh. It almost cost me the best thing that ever happened to me. What if we're moving too fast? Elena asked, though her heart was already saying yes to everything James offered. What if we're confusing gratitude and proximity with love? James shifted Isabella to one arm so he could cup Elena's face with his free hand. Look at me, Elena, what do you see? Elena searched his eyes, looking for doubt or obligation or anything that suggested his feelings weren't real. Instead, she saw love, certainty, and a future she'd stopped believing she deserved. I see home, she whispered. James leaned down to kiss her gently, careful not to disturb Isabella sleeping in his arms. Then marry me, not because of contracts or inheritance requirements, but because we love each other and we're already a family. Elena felt the last of her resistance crumble. Yes, she said against his lips. Yes, I'll marry you. Isabella chose that moment to wake up and let out a small cry, as if she was giving her approval to the decision her parents had just made. I think she likes the idea, James said with a grin. Elena laughed through her tears. She's going to be so spoiled having parents who adore her this much. She deserves to be spoiled, James said, settling into the rocking chair with Isabella, while Elena perched on the arm. She brought us together. As Elena watched James feed Isabella her bottle, she marveled at how completely her life had changed. A year ago she'd been drowning in debt and despair. Now she was engaged to a man who loved her, mother to a perfect daughter and part of a family she'd never dreamed possible. There's one more thing, James said as Isabella finished her bottle. I want to legally adopt Isabella as our daughter together. No more birth mother and biological father, just mom and dad. Elena's eyes filled with tears again. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything. You carried her. You gave birth to her. You love her. You're her mother in every way that matters. As they settled Isabella back into her crib and returned to their bedroom, Elena felt a peace she'd never experienced. Tomorrow they would start planning a wedding and a future together. Tonight they would sleep knowing that their family was real, permanent, and built on love rather than contracts. The business arrangement that had brought them together was over. Their love story was just beginning. Living in James's penthouse during her final month of pregnancy gave Elena a glimpse into a life she'd never imagined. Beyond the obvious luxury, she discovered small details about James that made her fall deeper in love despite her best efforts to protect her heart. He left little notes by her breakfast tray each morning before heading to work, reminders to take her vitamins, encouragement for her physical therapy exercises, or sometimes just silly jokes to make her smile. He called during lunch breaks to check on her and the baby. In the evenings, he cooked dinner himself rather than ordering from expensive restaurants, claiming he enjoyed the process. You don't have to wait on me, Elena protested one evening as James brought her a plate of pasta he'd made from scratch. I'm not waiting on you, James said, settling into his usual chair beside the couch where Elena spent most of her time. I'm taking care of my family. The word family hung between them like a bridge neither was quite ready to cross. Elena's heart ached with how much she wanted it to be true, but their arrangement still loomed over everything like a storm cloud. Elena's mother Carmen visited frequently during those final weeks. The cancer treatment had been successful, and Carmen looked more like her old self every day. She watched the interaction between Elena and James with knowing eyes. Mija, Carmen said one afternoon while James was at work, this man loves you. Elena shifted uncomfortably on the couch, her hand resting on her enormous belly. It's complicated, Mama. Love is always complicated, Carmen replied, but some complications are worth working through. What if he changes his mind after the, baby is born? What if this is just him being protective of his daughter? Carmen took Elena's hand gently. What does your heart tell you? Elena's heart told her that James's feelings were real, that the tenderness in his eyes when he looked at her had nothing to do with their contract, and everything to do with love. But her brain reminded her of all the ways this could go wrong. I'm scared, Mama. I've never had anything this good in my life. What if I don't deserve it? Elena Rodriguez, Carmen said firmly, you deserve every happiness in the world. Don't let fear steal that from you. Meanwhile, James faced pressure from his own family as word of the arrangement spread. His uncle Robert, who stood to inherit control of Morrison Industries if James failed to produce an heir, was particularly vocal in his disapproval. You're getting too attached to this woman, Robert warned during a tense family dinner. Remember, this is a business arrangement. When it's over, it's over. I'm well aware of the terms, James replied coolly. Are you? Because my sources tell me she's living in your home now. That's not professional distance, James. James set down his fork with deliberate calm. Elena is carrying my child and following doctor's orders for bed rest. Where she stays during that time is my decision. The family expects you to handle this properly, Robert continued. Take the child, pay the woman, and move on. Don't complicate things with misplaced sentiment. After dinner, James sat in his study thinking about his uncle's words. Was he complicating things? The practical side of his brain said yes. Elena had agreed to carry his child in exchange for money. She'd made it clear from the beginning that she planned to leave afterward. But his heart told a different story. His heart had been cataloging every smile, every laugh, every moment of connection between them. His heart had been planning a future that included Elena, not just Isabella. The question was whether Elena's heart was telling her the same story. Elena went into labor on a Tuesday morning at 38 weeks, 3 days before her scheduled cesarean section. She woke to mild contractions that gradually intensified over the course of the morning. I think it's time, she told James, as he prepared to leave for a board meeting. James took one look at Elena's face and canceled everything on his schedule. Are you sure? Pretty sure, Elena gasped through another contraction. These feel different from the false labor last month. The drive to the hospital felt both endless and too short. Elena gripped James's hand in the car, trying to breathe through contractions that were coming faster and stronger. You're going to be amazing, James said, bringing her hand to his lips. I'm so proud of you. Elena wanted to tell him she loved him. The words pressed against her lips, demanding to be spoken, but fear held them back. What if he didn't say them back? What if this was goodbye? Dr. Chen confirmed that Elena was in active labor and progressing quickly. Looks like Isabella is eager to meet the world, she said with a smile. We should have a baby in the next few hours. The next 6 hours passed in a blur of contractions, breathing exercises, and medical monitoring. James never left Elena's side, holding her hand, feeding her ice chips, and talking her through the difficult moments. I can't do this, Elena panted during transition, the most intense phase of labor. Yes, you can, James said firmly. You're the strongest person I know. You can do anything. What if I'm not a good mother? What if I don't know how to... Elena, James interrupted gently. You're going to be an incredible mother. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. According to their contract, Elena wouldn't be Isabella's mother. She would be the woman who carried her and gave birth to her, nothing more. But in that moment, neither of them was thinking about contracts. Isabella Elena Morrison entered the world at 6:47 p.m., weighing 7 pounds and 2 ounces. She had dark hair like her father and her mother's delicate features. Her cry was strong and healthy, filling the delivery room with the sound of new life. She's perfect, Elena whispered, tears streaming down her face as Dr. Chen placed the baby on her chest. James stood frozen beside the bed, staring at his daughter with wonder and terror in equal measure. Isabella was real, warm, and absolutely beautiful. But more than that, she was his and Elena's. Would you like to hold her? Elena asked softly. With shaking hands, James took his daughter for the first time. Isabella quieted immediately, as if she recognized her father's voice from all the times he'd talked to Elena's belly during the past months. Hello, Isabella, James whispered. I'm your daddy. I've been waiting so long to meet you. Elena watched James hold their daughter, and felt her heart break and heal simultaneously. This was the moment she'd been dreading, when Isabella became real, when leaving would transform from difficult to impossible. But it was also the moment when she truly understood what love meant. Love meant wanting the best for Isabella, even if that meant walking away. Love meant giving James the heir he needed and the family he deserved, even if it cost Elena everything. As the medical staff performed their post-delivery procedures and Elena was moved to a recovery room, reality began to set in. The pregnancy was over. Isabella was here and healthy. Soon, Elena would need to make the decision that would define the rest of all their lives. James seemed to sense her thoughts. "Elena," he said quietly as they settled into the recovery room with Isabella sleeping peacefully in the hospital bassinet. "We need to talk." Elena's heart hammered in her chest. This was it. The moment. When their arrangement would either end as planned or transform into something entirely new. "I know," Elena whispered, "but can we just have tonight? Just one night as a family before we figure out what comes next?" James nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. Tomorrow would bring lawyers and contracts and difficult decisions. Tonight they would simply be James, Elena, and Isabella, a family even if it was temporary. But both of them were beginning to hope that temporary might not be the ending their story was meant to have. Elena's second trimester brought unexpected changes beyond her growing belly. The morning sickness faded, replaced by energy she hadn't felt in years. More surprising was how naturally James had become part of her daily routine. He accompanied her to doctor appointments now, sitting quietly in the corner while Dr. Chen performed ultrasounds and checked the baby's development. Elena had initially protested, saying the appointments were medical necessities, not social events. But secretly, she appreciated having someone there who cared about the results as much as she did. "The baby's heartbeat is strong and steady," Dr. Chen announced during the 18-week appointment. "Would you like to know the gender?" Elena and James exchanged glances. They'd discussed this moment during their coffee meetings but hadn't reached a decision. "Yes," Elena said softly. "We'd like to know. Congratulations. You're having a daughter." The room fell silent except for the steady whoosh of the baby's heartbeat through the ultrasound machine. Elena stared at the screen, seeing tiny hands and feet that would soon be reaching and kicking in the real world. A daughter. James Morrison's daughter, who would inherit his business empire and carry on his family name. Elena's daughter, who would grow up never knowing the woman who carried her for 9 months. "She's beautiful," James said quietly, his voice thick with emotion Elena had never heard from him before. After the appointment, they sat in James's car in the parking lot, both processing what they'd learned. "Have you thought about names?" Elena asked. James turned to look at her, surprised. "I thought you wouldn't want to be involved in that decision." "She's still my daughter too, even if it's temporary," Elena said, echoing words from their first meeting. "I'd like to help choose her name." They spent the following weeks discussing names during their coffee meetings, which had gradually moved from the small cafe near the clinic to quieter restaurants where they could talk for hours. Elena suggested names from her family's Spanish heritage, while James shared stories about women in his family history. "What about Isabella?" Elena suggested one afternoon. "It means devoted to God in Spanish, but it was also the name of several queens." "Isabella Morrison," James said, testing how it sounded. "I like it. Strong but elegant. Isabella Elena Morrison," Elena added quietly. James looked at her with surprise and something deeper. "You want her to have your name too?" "As a middle name, if that's okay with you." It wasn't part of their agreement. Middle names weren't mentioned in any contract. But James found himself nodding. "Isabella Elena Morrison, it's perfect." As Elena entered her 3rd trimester, the reality of their situation became harder to ignore. In 3 months she would give birth to Isabella, and then walk away from both the baby and James forever. The thought that had once brought relief now felt like facing an execution. James wrestled with similar feelings. His grandfather's will would be satisfied. The Morrison empire would continue. But increasingly, James found himself wanting something the will hadn't anticipated. A real family with Elena and Isabella. The turning point came during Elena's 28th week. She was at home one evening when sharp pains started in her abdomen. At first, she thought it was normal pregnancy discomfort, but the pain intensified quickly. Elena called Dr. Chen's emergency line with shaking hands. "Something's wrong," she whispered into the phone. "The pain is getting worse." "Call an ambulance immediately," Dr. Chen instructed. "I'll meet you at the hospital." Elena's second call was to James. He answered on the first ring despite the late hour. "Elena? What's wrong?" "The baby," Elena gasped through another wave of pain. "Something's happening." "I'm going to the hospital. I'm on my way." James broke multiple traffic laws getting to the hospital. He found Elena in the emergency room, hooked up to monitors and looking scared in a way that made his chest ache. "What's happening?" he asked Dr. Chen. "Possible preterm labor," the doctor explained. "We're working to stop the contractions and stabilize both mother and baby." For the next 6 hours, James sat beside Elena's bed, holding her hand through contractions and medication doses. Neither of them spoke about their contract or their arrangement. They were just two people terrified of losing something precious. "I'm scared," Elena whispered during a brief lull in the medical activity. "I know," James said, squeezing her hand. "I'm scared too. If something happens to her, nothing's going to happen," James said firmly. "You're both going to be fine." Elena looked at him through exhausted eyes. "How can you be so sure?" "Because I won't let anything happen to either of you," James said, and realized he meant it completely. By morning, the contractions had stopped and Isabella's heartbeat had stabilized. Dr. Chen prescribed bed rest for the remainder of the pregnancy and warned that Elena would need constant monitoring. "She can't live alone during this period," Dr. Chen told James privately. "She needs someone with her at all times in case complications arise." James didn't hesitate. "She'll stay with me," Elena protested weakly when James explained the arrangement. "I can't impose on your life like that." "You're not imposing," James said gently. "You're carrying my daughter. Let me take care of you both." Moving into James's penthouse apartment felt surreal to Elena. The space was larger than any home she'd ever lived in, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city and furnishings that probably cost more than most people's cars. But James made her feel welcome rather than intimidated. He converted his home office into a comfortable room for Elena, complete with everything she needed for bed rest. He hired a part-time nurse for when he was at work, but spent most of his free time sitting with Elena, reading or watching movies together. "You don't have to entertain me," Elena said one afternoon as James settled into the chair beside her bed with a book. "I'm not entertaining you," James replied. "I'm keeping myself company. It gets lonely in this place." Elena studied his profile as he read. "Do you ever regret not having a normal family? Marriage, kids the traditional way?" James was quiet for a long moment. "I used to think business was enough, that continuing the family legacy was the only thing that mattered. And now," James closed his book and looked at Elena directly. "Now I think I might have had it backwards." The air between them felt charged with unspoken possibilities. Elena's heart raced, but she forced herself to remember their agreement. "James," she said quietly. "We can't." "Can't what?" "Fall in love," Elena whispered. "That's not what this is supposed to be." James moved his chair closer to her bed. "What if I told you it's too late for that?" Elena's breath caught. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that somewhere between coffee meetings and doctor appointments and watching you grow my daughter, I fell in love with you, Elena Rodriguez. And I think you might feel the same way." Elena closed her eyes, fighting tears she hadn't expected. "It doesn't matter what I feel. In 2 months, I give birth to Isabella and leave. That's what we agreed." "Agreements can be changed," James said softly. Elena opened her eyes to find him watching her with an intensity that made her chest tight. "Into what?" "Into whatever we want them to be." For a moment, Elena allowed herself to imagine a different ending to their story. A life where she stayed, where they raised Isabella together, where the love growing between them had room to flourish. But reality crashed back quickly. "I'm not from your world, James. I'm a housekeeper with a high school diploma and a mountain of debt you had to pay off. You're the strongest, smartest, most compassionate woman I've ever met," James said fiercely. "Your education and bank account don't define your worth." Elena wanted desperately to believe him, but fear held her back. What if this was just pregnancy hormones and proximity? What if James changed his mind once Isabella was born, and Elena was no longer carrying something he wanted? Let's just focus on keeping Isabella healthy, Elena said finally. We can figure out the rest later. James nodded, but both of them knew that later was approaching fast, and with it, decisions that would change all their lives forever. The medical clinic Dr. Sarah Chen recommended was nothing like the overcrowded public hospital where Elena's mother received treatment. Everything gleamed white and spotless, with soft music playing in waiting rooms filled with comfortable chairs and fresh flowers. Elena felt out of place in her discount store clothes, but the staff treated her with the same respect they showed every patient. She supposed James Morrison's money opened doors she'd never imagined walking through. The fertility treatments began immediately. Elena learned more about her body in 2 weeks than she had in 26 years. Dr. Chen explained every procedure with patience and kindness, never making Elena feel ashamed for asking questions. Your health is excellent, Dr. Chen said during Elena's 3rd appointment. Mr. Morrison was wise to choose you. Many women in high-stress financial situations show physical signs of that stress, but you're remarkably resilient. Elena didn't feel resilient. She felt scared and overwhelmed, but at least she no longer felt hopeless. The first payment had cleared her mother's immediate medical debts and secured the best oncologist in the state. Carmen was already looking stronger and more optimistic. Meanwhile, James struggled with aspects of the arrangement he hadn't anticipated. He'd expected to sign contracts, write checks, and wait for results. Instead, he found himself curious about Elena's life and progress. His assistant, Mrs. Patterson, updated him weekly. Miss Rodriguez asks thoughtful questions about nutrition and prenatal care. Dr. Chen says she's an ideal patient. James caught himself wondering what Elena's questions were, how she spent her days, whether she was comfortable in the small apartment he'd arranged for her near the clinic. These weren't thoughts he'd planned to have. The successful implantation happened on a Thursday morning in October. Elena lay still on the examination table afterward, staring at the ceiling and trying to process that she might actually be pregnant. The next 2 weeks would tell them if the procedure had worked. James happened to be at the clinic for a scheduled check-in when Elena emerged from the procedure room. She looked pale and tired, but her eyes held a determination he hadn't seen before. "How are you feeling?" he asked, surprising himself with the genuine concern in his voice. "Strange," Elena answered honestly, "like my whole life just changed, but I won't know for sure for 2 weeks." They stood in the hallway for a moment, neither sure what to say next. This was uncharted territory for both of them. "Would you like to get coffee?" James asked suddenly. "I mean, if caffeine is allowed. I don't know much about pregnancy restrictions." Elena smiled for the first time since he'd met her. "Decaf is fine, and yes, I'd like that." The coffee shop near the clinic was small and busy, nothing like the exclusive restaurants James usually frequented. But sitting across from Elena in a worn vinyl booth, he found himself more relaxed than he'd been in months. "Tell me about your mother," James said, stirring sugar into his espresso. Elena's face lit up as she described Carmen's strength during her illness, her career as a teacher before the cancer, her determination to beat the disease. She taught 2nd grade for 15 years. Her students still send her cards. "She sounds remarkable," James said, and meant it. "She is. She's the reason I'm doing this." Elena paused, then added quietly, "Well, one of the reasons." "What are the others?" Elena considered her answer carefully. "I want to prove to myself that I can handle something this big, that I'm stronger than my circumstances." James found himself admiring her honesty. Most people in his world said what they thought he wanted to hear. Elena spoke the truth, even when it made her vulnerable. They talked for over an hour, covering everything from Elena's abandoned college plans to James's pressure to produce an heir for the family business. By the time they parted ways, both felt something shifting in their carefully constructed arrangement. The pregnancy test 2 weeks later was positive. Elena stared at the 2 pink lines on the test strip, feeling a mixture of relief, excitement, and terror. She was pregnant with James Morrison's baby. In 8 months, she would give birth to a child. She would then hand over to its father and walk away forever. The thought made her chest tight with an emotion she couldn't name. James received the news via phone call from Dr. Chen. "Congratulations, Mr. Morrison. Miss Rodriguez is pregnant and all her initial indicators look excellent. He should have felt victorious. His problem was solved. In 9 months, he would have the heir his grandfather's will required, and his family's legacy would be secure. Instead, he felt something more complex. Relief, yes, but also a growing sense of responsibility toward Elena that went beyond their contract. Elena's morning sickness started in week 6 and hit her like a truck. She spent most mornings hunched over the toilet in her new apartment, wondering why they called it morning sickness when it lasted all day. James, learning about her condition from Mrs. Patterson's reports, did something he hadn't planned. He showed up at Elena's apartment on a Saturday morning with groceries and ginger tea. "You don't have to take care of me," Elena said, but she accepted the tea gratefully. "I know," James replied, unpacking crackers and bland foods Dr. Chen had recommended. "I want to." Elena studied his face, looking for signs of obligation or pity. Instead, she saw genuine concern and something else she couldn't identify. "Why?" she asked. James paused in arranging items in her refrigerator. The honest answer was that he'd started thinking about her constantly, worrying about her comfort and health in ways that had nothing to do with the baby. But admitting that would complicate everything. "Because you're doing something extraordinary," he said instead. "You deserve support." As Elena's pregnancy progressed, their weekly coffee meetings became a routine. James told himself he was just monitoring his investment, but the truth was more complicated. He looked forward to seeing Elena, to hearing her thoughts about books she was reading and her mother's improving health. Elena found herself sharing things with James she'd never told anyone. Her dreams of opening her own business someday. Her fear that she wasn't strong enough to give up the baby when the time came. Her growing confusion about what she felt for the baby's father. "Sometimes I forget this is temporary," she admitted during their meeting in month 4, her hand resting on her newly visible bump. James felt his chest tighten. "What do you mean?" "This," Elena gestured between them. "These conversations. The way you check on me. It feels like friendship, but I know it's not real." "Who says it's not real?" James asked quietly. Elena met his eyes across the small table. Something passed between them that made her pulse quicken and her breath catch. This was dangerous territory for both of them. "Because in 5 months I walk away," Elena said softly. "That's what we agreed." James nodded, but for the first time since this arrangement began, that agreement felt less like a solution and more like a countdown to losing something precious he was just beginning to understand. Elena Rodriguez stared at the stack of overdue bills spread across her kitchen table like fallen leaves. Each red notice felt like a small knife cutting into her hopes. The medical bills from her mother's cancer treatment towered over everything else, threatening to crush what remained of her family's financial stability. Her phone buzzed with another call from a debt collector. She let it go to voicemail, just like the dozen others that week. 26 years old and drowning in debt that wasn't even hers to begin with. Elena felt the weight of responsibility crushing her shoulders. "Mia, you don't have to do this," her mother, Carmen, said from the doorway. Even after months of treatment, she still tried to stand tall, but Elena could see how the illness had weakened her once strong frame. "Mama, we've talked about this. The treatment is working. We can't stop now." Elena folded the bills and shoved them into a drawer. "I'll figure something out, but what?" She'd already taken every overtime shift available at the hotel where she worked as a housekeeper. Her college degree in business felt worthless when no company wanted to hire someone with her financial baggage. Banks had laughed at her loan applications. That evening, Elena's best friend Maria called with what seemed like a crazy idea. "There's this website," Maria said carefully. "Rich people post opportunities. Some of them are legitimate business proposals." Elena was skeptical, but desperation made her listen. Late that night, she found herself scrolling through posts that ranged from ridiculous to downright creepy. She was about to close the laptop when one post caught her attention. "Seeking responsible woman for business arrangement. Substantial compensation for specific service. Serious inquiries only. Discretion required." The contact information led to a law firm downtown. Elena stared at the screen for an hour before finally sending a brief, professional email expressing her interest in learning more about the business opportunity. The response came within 12 hours, requesting a meeting at the law firm the following afternoon. Elena took a personal day from work. borrowing Maria's best dress and spending her last $20 on a taxi to the gleaming downtown office building. James Morrison III stood 6 feet 2 inches tall, with dark hair that probably cost more to cut than Elena made in a week. His custom suit fit perfectly across broad shoulders, and his steel gray eyes seemed to analyze everything they looked at. At 34, he commanded boardrooms and built business empires, but he couldn't solve the one problem that mattered most to his family legacy. "Miss Rodriguez," he said, extending a hand that felt warm and surprisingly gentle. "Thank you for coming." The lawyer, Mr. Patterson, handled the initial explanation while James watched Elena's reactions carefully. The arrangement was unusual but legally sound. James needed an heir to inherit his family's business empire according to his grandfather's will. The woman who provided that heir would receive $2 million plus all medical expenses and living costs during the pregnancy. Elena's hands trembled slightly as she processed the information. "You want me to have your baby?" "It's a business transaction," James said, his voice steady and professional. "No emotional involvement. You would be well cared for, and afterward you could start fresh anywhere you choose." The room fell silent except for the hum of air conditioning. Elena thought about her mother's medical bills, about the notices taped to their apartment door, about the hopelessness that had become her constant companion. "I need time to think," she said finally. James nodded. "Of course. But I should mention that several other candidates are being considered. This opportunity won't remain open indefinitely." Elena stood to leave, her mind racing. $2 million would solve everything. Her mother could get the best treatment available. They could move somewhere with clean air and sunshine. She could finish her education without worrying about money. But having a baby with a stranger? Giving up that child? The thought made her stomach twist. That night, Elena sat beside her mother's bed watching Carmen sleep fitfully. The cancer had aged her mother 10 years and 6 months. The treatment was working, but it was also destroying their finances and Carmen's quality of life. "What would you do, Mama?" Elena whispered to the quiet room. Over the next 3 days, Elena researched everything she could about James Morrison III. He was known for his business acumen and philanthropy, but his personal life remained private. No scandals, no bad business deals, no angry ex-employees speaking to tabloids. If she had to trust someone with something this important, he seemed like the safest choice possible. Elena also spent hours reading about surrogacy laws and arrangements. This was different, of course, but the legal framework was similar. Women did this for other families all the time. The only difference was that this baby would be genetically hers too. On Thursday evening, Elena made her decision. She called the law firm and requested another meeting. This time, James met her alone in his office atop the Morrison building. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the entire city, but Elena found herself focused on the man across from her, rather than the scenery. "I'll do it," she said without preamble, "but I have conditions." James leaned back in his leather chair, intrigued. Most people in her financial situation would have jumped at his offer without negotiation. "I want half the money up front to cover my mother's treatment," Elena continued. "I want to choose my own doctor, and I want regular updates about the child after it's born." "The first two are acceptable," James said. "The third is more complicated. The arrangement works best with clean separation." Elena stood to leave. "Then find someone else." "Wait." Something in James's voice made her pause. "Why is that important to you?" For the first time since entering his office, Elena's professional mask slipped. "Because it's still my baby too. I won't be an anonymous incubator, Mr. Morrison. Either you respect that this child will be part of me or this doesn't work." James studied her face for a long moment. Most of the other candidates had focused only on the money. Elena was different. She was thinking about the child, about what this arrangement really meant. "Annual updates," he said finally. "Photos and basic information about health and development." Elena nodded and sat back down. "Then we have a deal." As they worked through the remaining details with the lawyers, neither Elena nor James realized they had just set in motion something neither of them expected. What started as a cold business transaction was about to become something far more complicated than either had planned. 6 months later, Elena stood in front of the mirror in the bridal suite of the Morrison family estate, hardly recognizing the woman staring back at her. The ivory silk dress she wore was simple but elegant, chosen for its classic beauty rather than its price tag. Her mother Carmen sat nearby, healthy and radiant, putting the finishing touches on Elena's hair. "You look beautiful, mija," Carmen said softly, tears glistening in her eyes. "Your father would be so proud." Elena squeezed her mother's hand. The past year had transformed both their lives in ways they never could have imagined. Carmen's cancer was in full remission, and she'd recently started substitute teaching again. More importantly, she was about to become a grandmother to Isabella and mother-in-law, to a man who loved her daughter completely. "Are you nervous?" Carmen asked. Elena considered the question. "No," she said, surprising herself. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." A soft knock interrupted them. Maria, Elena's best friend and maid of honor, peeked in. "The photographer is ready for some pictures with Isabella," Maria announced. "And your groom is getting antsy downstairs," Elena laughed. "Tell him he'll have to wait like every other groom in history." Isabella, now 6 months old, was the most beautiful baby Elena had ever seen. She had James's dark hair and serious expression, but Elena's bright smile and love of attention. As the photographer positioned them for photos, Isabella gurgled happily, as if she understood she was part of something special. "She's going to steal the show," Maria observed, making funny faces to get Isabella to smile for the camera. "She already has," Elena replied, kissing her daughter's forehead. "She stole our hearts the moment she arrived." The wedding ceremony was small and intimate, held in the garden of the Morrison estate with only close family and friends present. Elena had insisted on keeping it simple, despite James's offer to plan something more elaborate. "I don't need a big wedding," Elena had told him during their planning discussions. "I just need you and Isabella and the people we love most." As Elena walked down the aisle carrying Isabella, she saw James waiting for her at the altar. He wore a classic black tuxedo, but his attention was focused entirely on his bride and daughter. The love in his eyes made Elena's heart race the same way it had that first day in the coffee shop. The officiant, a family friend of the Morrisons, had worked with Elena and James to create a ceremony that reflected their unusual beginning and their hopes for the future. "James and Elena," the officiant began, "your love story started in an unexpected way, but it has grown into something beautiful and real. Today you're not just pledging your love to each other, but promising to be a family to this precious little girl who brought you together." As they exchanged vows they had written themselves, there wasn't a dry eye in the small gathering. James promised to love Elena not despite their complicated beginning, but because of the strength and grace she had shown throughout their journey. Elena promised to trust in their love and build a future together that honored both their individual dreams and their shared hopes. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Isabella chose that moment to let out a delighted squeal, as if she was celebrating along with the guests. "I think she approves," James said, kissing Elena as applause erupted around them. The reception was held on the estate's terrace, with dinner served at tables decorated with simple white roses and candles. Elena's mother gave a toast that brought everyone to tears, speaking about second chances and the power of love to transform lives. "When Elena told me about her arrangement with James," Carmen said, raising her glass, "I was worried she was making a decision based on fear and desperation. But watching them together, I see that sometimes the most unexpected paths lead to the most beautiful destinations." James's uncle Robert, who had opposed the original arrangement, surprised everyone by standing to offer his own toast. "I'll admit, I thought James was making a mistake," Robert said. "I thought this whole arrangement was a dangerous distraction from family responsibility. I was wrong. Elena hasn't distracted James from his responsibilities. She's helped him understand what really matters. To James, Elena, and Isabella, may your family continue to grow in love and happiness." As the evening wound down, Elena found herself on the terrace overlooking the estate's gardens, Isabella sleeping peacefully in her arms. The past year felt like a lifetime ago. The woman who had desperately searched for a way to pay her mother's medical bills seemed like a different person entirely. "Any regrets?" James asked, joining her at the railing. Elena considered the question seriously. "About marrying you? Never. About our arrangement? I think I'm grateful for it." "Grateful? It brought us together," Elena explained. "If you hadn't needed an heir and I hadn't needed money, we never would have met. We lived in completely different worlds." James wrapped his arms around Elena and Isabella, creating a warm cocoon around their small family. "I used to think my grandfather's will was a burden," forcing me to produce an heir to keep the family business. Now I think maybe he was wiser than I gave him credit for. How so? Maybe he knew that having a child would teach me what really matters. Maybe he knew I needed someone like you to show me that business success means nothing without people to share it with. Elena leaned back against James's chest, watching the stars appear in the darkening sky. What do you think he would have thought of me? He would have loved you, James said without hesitation. He would have loved your strength and your values and the way you make me a better man. Most of all, he would have loved seeing his great-granddaughter growing up with parents who adore her. As if she sensed their conversation, Isabella stirred in Elena's arms and opened her eyes. She looked up at her parents with the serious expression she'd inherited from her father, then broke into the radiant smile that was purely her own. "Look at that," Elena whispered. "She knows she's loved." "She'll always know that," James promised. "Both of you will." Later that night, as they settled into their new life as a married couple, Elena thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. What started as a desperate business arrangement had grown into something neither of them had expected, a love story built on honesty, trust, and the shared commitment to giving Isabella the best life possible. "I love you, Mrs. Morrison," James said as they checked on Isabella one last time before bed. "I love you too, Mr. Morrison," Elena replied, still marveling at how natural it felt to use her new name. As they stood together watching their daughter sleep, Elena realized that some of the best things in life came from the most unexpected places. She'd entered James's world looking for a way to save her mother's life, and had found something she hadn't even known she was searching for. A home, a family, and a love that would last forever. Isabella Elena Morrison would grow up knowing she was wanted, loved and cherished by parents who had found each other through her, and someday, when she was old enough to understand, they would tell her the story of how a business arrangement became a love story, and how sometimes the most complicated beginnings lead to the happiest endings. The billionaire had gotten his heir, Elena had saved her mother, and Isabella had brought them all together into something more beautiful than any of them had dared to dream. Their story was proof that love could bloom in the most unexpected circumstances. And that family wasn't just about blood or contracts. It was about choosing to build a life together based on love, commitment, and the shared hope for a future filled with joy. In the end, everyone got more than they had bargained for, and none of them would have changed a single moment of their complicated, beautiful beginning.